Hello from the German house in New York City. I am Eva Bosbach, Executive Director of the North America Office of the University of Cologne, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our 11th Transatlantic Tandem Talk. In this series, we showcase various research topics from the University of Cologne in Germany and our partners here in the US, with today's discussion zooming in on inequality in higher education in the US and Germany. One of the United States founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, has famously written, quote, "An investment in knowledge pays the best interest," end of quote. But what about those who have very limited resources to invest to begin with, whose families cannot afford high tuition fees or tutoring, whose career ambitions are cut short because they have to make time for childcare and housekeeping? And what if the government does not provide a system that ensures equitable access to high-quality education? Today's topic explores inequality in higher education in the US and Germany, and especially the roles that gender and social class play in that regard. As one of the largest higher education institutions in Germany, the University of Cologne has dedicated itself to being home to a diverse group of students, researchers, and staff members, and providing comprehensive support of all levels. For example, we are proud to hold the title of a pro-gender equality university as one of only 12 German universities, as our gender equality concepts have been considered particularly efficient. The institutionalized dual career and family support, as well as specific mentoring programs for students with non-academic family backgrounds, are only two examples. Another one is research on demography and on social inequality that is being done at the University of Cologne and that we are happy to showcase today with Professor Marita Jacobs and her colleague here in the US at Ohio State University, Professor Claudia Buchmann. Now, before I hand over to the next speaker, I would like to thank all our dear partners in this Transatlantic Tandem Talk series, the German Center for Research and Innovation, DWIH New York, the German Consulate General New York, Deutsches Haus at NYU, the Goethe Institute New York, the German Embassy in Washington, D.C., 1014 Space for Ideas, the German Research Foundation, DFG North America, the American Friends of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, America House NRW, the American Council on Germany, and the German-American Exchange Service, DAAD in New York. It is an honor to have Christian Strowa, Director of the DAAD North America and DWIH New York with us today. We could not wish for a more suitable partner for this topic than the DAAD, promoting international academic mobility in the spirit of change by exchange since 1925, and therefore celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. Congratulations, and without further ado, Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eva, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Having a multitude of approaches, visions, and backgrounds is of fundamental importance in shaping global cooperation in higher education and research. Good science and international cooperation thrive on a medley of perspectives that is often rooted in the individual biographies of those involved. This is exactly what we mean when we at the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, talk about change through exchange. We are convinced that different perspectives sharpen our view of the world and help us overcome our challenges, and that we can make progress together. Perspectives can differ because people from different countries and different cultures have different perspectives, but that is just one aspect of many. When we talk about exchange, we are also talking about the exchange between people with different academic backgrounds, with different family migration histories, and of course, between the genders. I would like to welcome you to today's exchange of expertise, thoughts, and ideas. Inequality in higher education is a topic that is very important to the DAAD at multiple levels. In fact, the DAAD recently published its Strategy 2030, which continues to address inequality in higher education head-on. So it is a true pleasure to be here today. I would like to thank our panelists today. I would like to thank Eva Bosbach and her team, and of course, the University of Cologne, New York office for organizing this event. Thank you very much for joining us today, and back to you, Eva.
Thank you very much, Chris. I would now like to hand over to the moderator of today's talk, Peter Kerrigan, who works closely with us here at the German House as DAAD's Deputy Director in New York and Director of Marketing and Outreach for North America. Peter is an expert in the field of higher education, having worked for organizations such as the Institute for International Education, IIE. Currently, he's helping the European Association for International Education restructure its mentorship program and also serves as the chair of their social responsibility thematic committee. Peter also helped fund and grow the Rainbow Scholarship at the Fund for Education Abroad. Thank you, and over to you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Ava, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And welcome to our talk. Good afternoon and welcome. Good morning, good evening. We have people joining us from all over. Our Transatlantic Tandem talk, Rising Above or Lagging Behind, Inequality in Higher Education in the US and Germany. We will explore multiple topics around this issue today. As mentioned, I'm Peter Kerrigan. I'm the Deputy Director of DAAD's North American Regional Office here in New York and work very closely with Strowa and with the University of Cologne's New York office, as well as other offices. I'm also the Director of Marketing Outreach for DAAD in the US and Canada. So I'm really delighted to be joined by Dr. Claudia Buchmann, of Arts and Sciences, Distinguished Professor in the College of Arts and Sciences in the Department of Sociology, as already mentioned, at The Ohio State University, and Dr. Marita Jacob, Professor in the Institute of Sociology and Social Psychology at the University of Cologne. Both Dr. Buchmann and Dr. Jacob will compare the higher education systems in the US and Germany. They also will analyze the current state of inequality in these systems, in the higher education systems, and will also explore its causes, consequences, and hopefully potential pathways toward greater equity. Our two experts will present for up to 25 minutes, and then we will have time for question and answer. So we encourage you during this conversation or during their presentation to please post your questions and comments into the chat function. And Marita and I from the University of Cologne office and I will be combing those questions and sorting them out and grouping them thematically. And then at the end of the presentation, we will gladly work with our presenters to answer those questions. So without stopping us further, I would like to pass on the virtual mic here to both Dr. Buchmann and Dr. Jacob to begin their presentation. I look forward to our discussion afterward. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to everyone who has joined us today for what I think will be a very interesting discussion about inequality in higher education in the United States and Germany. Now, while there are many important axes of inequality in higher education, those might be linked to race and ethnicity, immigration status, many other factors. In the limited time we have available with you today, we have decided to focus on social class and gender inequalities because these are the areas in which we have done the most research. So in short, we recognize we're presenting just a tip of the iceberg on inequalities in higher education, but we hope that this presentation today piques your interest in this topic, and we will provide suggestions on the event website on what to read or how to dig deeper if you're interested. So before we begin discussing some key features of inequality in higher education in the US and Germany, Marita and I thought it would be helpful to understand some of the distinctive features of these educational systems. Oh, yeah, thank you, Marita. So the US system of higher education is distinctive from Germany and from most other countries in the world in many ways, and I'm just going to mention a few of those here. First, it's important to understand that virtually all American high schools award the same credential, the high school diploma. In other countries, including Germany, different types of secondary schools provide different credentials to their students. Moreover, in the United States, if students don't complete their high school diploma, they can earn what is called a GED. And so anyone with a high school diploma or a GED can enroll in higher education, which is not true in Germany. The American system of higher education also has many different types of institutions that offer different levels and types of degrees. So there's community colleges offering 2-year degrees, universities offering 4-year degrees or the bachelor's degree. And within this system, there are also great distinctions in prestige, which rank from the most prestigious and elite Ivy League universities to highly selective public universities to institutions that are open to admission for anyone with a high school credential. Finally, or I shouldn't say finally, but to complicate matters, there's been a rise of private for-profit institutions in the United States, and these tend to be very expensive, offering programs of questionable quality. And this is because we can talk about the rise of these private for-profit institutions in this space, and some of the challenges they create. But that's another new wrinkle in this system. It's also important to understand that the US system is sometimes called a college for all system, meaning that higher education is really the main pathway to good jobs in the labor market. For students who don't go to college in the United States, there are few vocational preparation programs. Vocational training is very decentralized, highly variable, like, as you're probably getting the sense, all aspects of the US educational system. And then finally, perhaps the most distinctive factor of higher education in the United States is that the majority of students must pay to attend, and the costs tend to be high. Today, the average cost of a four-year college degree ranges from $50,000 at less prestigious colleges and universities to $200,000 at the most elite universities. Now, while many students do receive some financial aid or scholarships, more than half of all students need to take out loans. In fact, a really interesting figure here is that 36%, so more than a third of Americans under age 40 have outstanding student loan debt, and that average amount of that debt is $30,000. So that's a really important factor to think about when we're starting to talk about inequality. These features of the US educational system have direct and obvious impacts for who's able to even go to college. And then they also have implications for the solutions to try to, how do we think about mitigating some of these or reducing these inequalities? They are all quite different from the features of higher education in Germany, which Professor Marita Jakob will now discuss.
Yeah, thank you. And as Claudia already was trying to explain, are some differences in the German system of education and the German system of higher education compared to the US. So, for example, in Germany, one specific feature of secondary school is that there are different school tracks, and these different school tracks reward different degrees. And this in turn has as a consequence that only 50% of an age cohort actually earns the degree that puts them to be eligible to enroll in higher education. So there is a considerable amount of students who do not earn the so-called, the German speakers know this, the Abitur that allows to enter university. There's a small amount that receives this higher education enrollment certificate later on in their later career, but the majority really is already sorted in the secondary school system. A second difference to the US system is in higher education, which is much less differentiated than in the American system. So we have the traditional universities, which are about 2/3 of first-year students enroll in these traditional universities. And we have, on the other hand, the universities of applied sciences that, yes, are the so-called second tier, but in the end, both reward the same degree. And there's a lot of change between institutions, between a bachelor's and master's degree. You can earn a bachelor's degree at the University of Applied Sciences and then change to a master's degree at a traditional university. But it's much less differentiated, and universities are considered more or less as equal across Germany. And an important feature that we will come back to later on when we talk about inequalities is that in Germany there is a very attractive apprenticeship system. And that is that for students who are eligible to enroll, a considerable numbers does not decide to enroll, but prefers attractive apprenticeship positions because they also could lead to medium management positions. So it is really a consideration of students who are eligible to enroll not to do so or not to do so in the first place because they want to enter the apprenticeship system. Regarding the costs in Germany, there are no tuition fees. So universities do charge students a small amount of number to cover university expenses, but that's nothing to be compared to the US system. So in principle, there is no large tuition fee. And in addition, the German government provides means-tested student aid. Again, for the German-speaking audience, it's a so-called BAföG system, which is means-tested. And it's important to know that although it is given to students by means-tested, only a small number of students actually receive that. It's less than 20%. But on the other hand, as there are no tuition fees, I think it's much less of an issue compared to the US. It doesn't mean that for individual student it is an issue, but regarding the cost, the German system provides more or less free access to university. Good. So there we are.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the indicators then, how these different systems, how we see differences in social class in terms of university enrollment. And I'm going to talk about the US case here. Now, sociologists, we are both sociologists, typically measure social class by both family income and parents' level of education. These are two different measures that reflect different aspects of social class that matter for all kinds of educational outcomes. Take a look at the figure on the left. This figure shows the relationship between family income and the likelihood of enrolling in higher education shortly after completing high school. And what you see here is that the bar marked Q5, quintile 5, those are children from the families in the highest income quintile. 89% of them enroll in university shortly after high school. This is in contrast to only 51% of those from families in the lowest income quintile. Also interesting is that more than half of lower class students enroll in two-year colleges, which is shown by that light blue section of the bar in Q1. So those are pretty strong class differences. Now, let's talk a little bit about education levels. Students from families where neither parent has a four-year college degree are defined as first-generation students. They're the first generation in their family to enroll in college. While they're much less likely to go to college or university in the first place, when they do go to college, they face numerous disadvantages in the process. Part of the story is definitely about income, again, given those costs, high tuition costs that we discussed. On average, family income of first-generation students is only $41,000, less than half of that of what we call continuing generation students, whose families' incomes are $90,000. Now, of course, what we know about given these tuition challenges, that's one factor, but also important is the fact that their parents did not attend college. So these students are lacking information, they lack networks, they lack the knowledge about how to enroll in college and succeed in college, especially given this great diversity, given that there's not a clear national system of higher education. So the information, to come by the information can be quite challenging. Just one example of this, how first-generation college students are disadvantaged. You see in this bar graph on the right side of the screen that they are much more likely to attend open access colleges, open admission colleges. By the way, the first-generation students here are noted by the light blue section of the bar. And they're far less likely, in contrast, to attend very selective colleges. So even when they go to college, they are much more likely to be going to weaker colleges and universities, and that's an important implication. We can discuss the implications of that. Moving on quickly to gender inequalities in the United States. You might be surprised. I don't know how common knowledge this is, but maybe you won't be surprised. I'll be curious to hear that in the United States, in the United States, women have become far more commonly degree recipients than men. So the graph on the left is showing us, now this is data from since 2000. So this is trend data. But we see marked by the orange bar that women today, they earn about 58% of all bachelor's degrees. Those are those 4-year college degrees. But also interesting is the fact that they're now also earning 62% of all master's degrees, which you see marked by the green bar, and 56% of all doctoral and professional degrees. Now, this is not necessarily a new phenomenon. In fact, women have been out earning men in terms of bachelor's degrees since the late 1980s. But this is a pretty striking difference, and it's a growing difference in terms of gender inequality in college degree receipt. Quickly, on the right side of the right graph shows that there's been less change in the fields of study that women and men go into in the United States. It's probably a bit hard for you to see, so I'm just going to summarize the key points of it, which are that women are earning the majority of bachelor's degrees in the health professions and biological sciences. You see that orange bar with the really rapid increase, that's health professions. So large numbers of women are going into the health professions. Men continue to earn the majority of bachelor's degrees in engineering, computer science, math, and physical sciences. And we can talk about the implications of that as well. But let's instead turn to the metrics, these similar metrics for Germany.
Yeah, let's have a look first at university enrollment by social class. And with social class, when we talk about social class, we mean parents' background or parents' resources. And here, what is shown here is, imagine you have an amount of children, 100 children of parents who do have, at least one parent has earned a higher education degree, his or herself. And we compare this to 100 children of parents without a higher education degree. Think of these students are in primary school. And then, as I already mentioned in the beginning, we have this transition to upper secondary school, which, by the way, happens quite early in the life course at age 10 to 12. So at that age, you already see that a considerable number of children of parents without a higher education degree do not enter the upper secondary track, which later on would allow them to go to university. If we now look, what is here marked with in red is enrollment in higher education. What you see is that 78% of children of parents with a higher education degree enroll in universities, compared to only 25% of children of parents without a higher education degree. And keep in mind that we said that the costs are much less compared to the US, but still we see a striking selectivity in terms of university enrollment by social class. And let's focus a little bit more on the students who are eligible to enroll in higher education. So now we are talking about students who are in the upper secondary school track, who are earning this Abitur, which is a certificate allowing them to enter higher education. And now we look at a specific group of students, which might be particularly important in terms of inequality, if we talk about inequality. And these are students who are high performing in school. So if we look at students who have an above average performance, so the really good students, and if we compare now against students from less privileged backgrounds to students from more privileged backgrounds, what we see here is the high-performing students from less privileged background enroll to 53% compared to students from privileged backgrounds, who almost everyone goes to university. That's 84%. So even though the high-performing students decide against higher education if they are from less privileged backgrounds. So this is a story about university enrollment by social class in Germany. And let's have also a look at gender inequality in Germany. What we see in Germany is that in contrast to the US, here we do not have a higher share of women entering universities compared to men. Here it is the case that now in the latest period we're looking at, last year, it was about 50%. So we have an equalization in terms of university enrollment by gender, no kind of advantage of women. However, and we'll also come back, or I relate that to what I said in the beginning, here the attractive vocational education and training system may play a role. And that is that the professions typically offered in vocational education and training are those in the health sector. And that might be part of the explanation why a lot of female students abstain from going to university, because they can achieve their aspired occupation by entering vocational education and training. However, what we also see in the German case, which mirrors the US case, is that we have a high gender segregation in the field of study. Again, we have fields that are dominated by females. These are on the right-hand side, the upper bars, and we have the typical male fields like engineering, computer science, and so on, that are typically male fields. So we do have an equalization in terms of enrollment, but we still have a strong, as in the US, segregation by field of study. So, as sociologists, what we presented so far were mainly descriptive. So we have inequality here in terms of social class, and we have inequalities by gender. But what we would like to know as scientists, and in specifically being sociologists, what are the reasons for these disparities by social class and gender? How can we explain the decisions, the pathways of young people, whether or not they decide to enroll or not to decide to enroll? And there's a classical distinction, a theoretical distinction that was already introduced in 1974 by Raymond Boudon, and that is still used in a lot of sociological studies. And here it is argued that what we can differentiate is, on the one hand, students differ by educational performance, and this is called the primary effects. And this difference in educational performance can be related to their social background or to their gender. So we have differences in educational performance that are due to different situations in their families, to different resources available in their families. And that's why, in the end, they perform differently in school. So, and this is called the primary effect. On the other hand, going over and above these differences in performance, there might be also some differences in educational decisions. And educational decisions, here we mean that students think whether or not they want to continue their career in higher education or not. And here, students may evaluate the benefits of going to university or not going, and calculate the benefits related to the cost that will be that they have to shoulder once they enter a specific pathway. And what may also play a role in this decision situation is the probability of success. And as you may already think yourself, is that these social class differences or gender differences in what we have seen before might be due to different considerations of benefits of males and females regarding enrolling or not, or the potential of families to bear the costs of higher education, and even the probability of success, the perspective, perception of one's probability of success may vary. Even if the performance, the grades students get, they still may think, oh, I have to be very, very able student to enter university, whereas those who have parents who experience universities themselves might be much more relaxed about whether or not their kids will succeed. So in terms of theory, these are two main angles how to explain these disparities by social class and gender. And now we will have a look how these explanations may help us to understand the differences we have been illustrating in the last 15 minutes for the US and Germany.
Yeah, so let's take a look at one example of a primary effect that pertains to the gender disparities we've been talking about, and that is the gender differences in educational performance. So the left side of the slide, this figure 3, shows you the mean high school GPA. Those are the grades that students earn in high school, or grade point average, in over the last 40 years. And what we see here is that there's a pretty large gender gap in favor of females in terms of the grades that are earned in high school. And this has existed for quite some time, the last 40 years. We can talk about that trend over time feature, but also it's important to underscore that girls are not getting better grades in school because they're smarter than boys. Scientific consensus is that girls and boys have similarities, they are more similar in terms of their levels of academic aptitude, and that's well established. But high school grades are an important marker of success in for success, or that idea of how likely are you to succeed in higher education. And they are a key marker that selective universities consider in their admissions decisions. So grades in high school are an important example of a primary effect. Another important feature is the kinds of courses that students are taking in high school. Universities consider the level of rigor of the coursework that students have done. Both of these are indicators of how prepared are you to be likely to succeed in higher education. And the graph on the right shows us that both in terms of math and science courses, women are more likely than men to be taking the highest level of these kinds of courses in high school. Which again is an interesting feature of and perhaps surprising, because we're talking about math and science, which have been traditionally masculine identified kinds of areas of the curriculum. But the key takeaway here is that women are taking more rigorous courses, they're earning better grades in college, and in high school, and these key gender differences in educational performance are definitely related to the large disparities in university enrollment in the United States. Now, I could show you similar data on the primary effects of this achievement or performance differences by social class. Those definitely exist, as Marita suggested, but let's turn now to an example of secondary effects, again, which refer to the cost-benefit analysis that students will typically do when making educational decisions.
So we have the same pattern with grades and gender in Germany, and that's why we decided not to show this again, but to continue with looking at this concept of secondary effects. And first of all, what you see here is that if you think of there is a difference between students from higher and lower classes to enroll, so there is this difference, and this picture here shows you how this difference can be explained. So what are the reasons that this difference occurs? And first of all, we also have an important aspect with 90% that is performance that we already have been talking about. But let's have a look more closely at these decision parameters that I tried to outline. And what you see here is that a very large share of the difference between students from different social backgrounds is due to these decision parameters. And here you see it is indeed the subjective success probability, it is the benefits, and interestingly, I would say for the German case, it's also costs that play really an important role. So for students, the cost they face when entering university are an important aspect why students from less privileged background do not enroll. So let's sum up what we have been talking about for you, the take-home messages. So we began with highlighting the differences in the education system in the US and Germany, and that they have really distinct structural differences. So they are set up differently. However, and that's, I think, an interesting observation is in both countries, we do have gender and social class disparities with different degrees, but we can observe similarities. And that's interesting because the systems, the education systems are different. And also what's, as a sociologist, is also the most interesting thing or the most interesting finding is that if we apply our concept of primary and secondary effect to explain these disparities in both countries, we see that these mechanisms that drive educational inequality can be compared. So these countries share the similar mechanisms that drive educational inequality in our case. So, summing up, what we would really like you to take home as a take-home message is we would highlight that understanding the educational structures and the mechanism to understand both how students have to act in a specific system and what are the mechanisms that drive inequalities is essential to know how that works if you want to change something. If you want to mitigate inequality, please bear in mind the structures and the mechanisms. And thank you. And now the floor is open for discussion. Oh, perhaps I can first, and then we come back that if you want to know more about our work of what we've been saying or what we have been doing research on, you can visit the website and scroll to the end of the website, or you just put the QR code in here and you will see what we've done. So thank you.
Well, thank you both. Really, really exciting and dynamic presentation. I've been taking lots of notes and lots of questions. One thing before we get to the Q&A, I just want to remind our attendees, our listeners, that if you joined us late or if you want to have a refresh after the presentation is being recorded and will be posted to the University of Cologne's New York office YouTube channel. So that having been said, I'll start with a couple of the questions that have been posted to our chat. And the first one that came through, I'll just read it out loud. And I'll just summarize it a bit. But Claudia, you mentioned that there's a noticeable difference in terms of the kind of universities that first generation students attend. You mentioned open admissions and potentially less prestigious universities in comparison to some of the others. And even with tuition fees playing less of a role, is there a similar phenomenon in Germany? Are there Marita, I guess, are there differences between the social class diversity between universities in Germany? And if so, why is that the case?
Oh, that's a question for me, right?
That's a question.
Well, yes, it was started off for you, but I'm sorry, I should have read it to the end. It actually veers over to you, Marita. But I think both of you could answer that. So if you need just a quick repeat, Marita, I'll tell you.
I got the question. But
you got the question. Okay, great. Okay.
Me to answer. So the question is, if we see these social class differences, if we look at universities and universities applied sciences as to different tiers, yes, we do see that. We see that students from more privileged backgrounds, from higher social classes, from parents with higher income, from non-first generation students are more likely to enroll in traditional universities. Part of the story is that in these traditional universities, it's the most prestigious fields such as medicine and law are offered at traditional universities that are not offered at the universities of applied sciences. But to answer your question, yes, we do see these social disparities in enrollment in the traditional universities as well in Germany.
Thank you. And Claudia, did you want to add anything to that before I go on to the next question?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marita. Thank you, Claudia. So speaking of Germany, what happens when we intersect the data here, those on German university enrollment by social class with family migration background, and sort of hone in on or zoom in on the different generations of migrants? And there are a couple of questions here, so I may have to repeat them. But sort of piggybacking onto that, what about the parents without higher education resources? Can you also just discuss that in relation to, I assume, to the migration background, since that seems to be the focal point of these questions?
Yeah.
And also, does language play a role? I guess in either case, in the German case, speaking German, and in the U.S. case, speaking English. Does that play a role from those students who come from a migrant background, both in terms of the university success and later professional success? So there are a couple of questions. First is to sort of drill it down a bit, looking at the migrant or the migration background, better said, and then looking at the parents as an impact there, and then ultimately, what is the success story for that student?
Yes. So I will start with migrant students in Germany, and I was prepared for that question. And the interesting thing in the German case is that students with migration backgrounds, so with at least one parent who has been born not in Germany, are more likely to enroll. And that is if they have achieved the Abitur. So we do have a lot of selection going on until the end of upper secondary school. And those students who really keep up until the Abitur, if they have achieved the Abitur, they take it as their pathway into university. So we have, yes, students with migration background in Germany, if they have achieved this highest school degree, use that and go into university, which is a really interesting finding here, because you would have expected it to be different, but this is due to this very stratified school system.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, the U.S. case is very interesting in terms of migration status and students from immigrant families. And I would say in the U.S., it really the answer really depends on which kind of group you're looking at. So, for example, Asian students from Asian immigrant backgrounds actually tend to do extremely well in the higher education system. They're able to go to higher education in larger numbers, largely because of some of the factors we've talked about: higher family incomes, different kinds of parental ideas about their children's schooling. But then there are other groups of migrants and immigrants that tend to have far lower rates of going into college and university, Hispanics in particular. So I would say, or people, I should say, people from Central and South America. So it gets very, very complicated very quickly. And so there's not one set answer in terms of comparing immigrants to other groups. We really need to break it down more by country of origin.
And do either of you, or perhaps in your research, have encountered how the mother tongue plays a role in terms of the language group they come from, if English is not, or German in the case of Germany, in terms of their success rates or integration rates?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, people may be familiar right now with the current attempts to dictate that English is the official language of the United States. We do have regions of the country where Spanish is very predominantly spoken. I would say, in contrast to Germany, where there is really an emphasis put on learning different languages. Students learn many languages in school. So there might be a little more openness to having children speak different languages. In the United States, that if the speaking English is absolutely crucial to students' educational success, and students who come from families that do not speak English, I think they have a lot more challenges because the educational system doesn't really have good structure for supporting those students.
Thank you. And Marita, in Germany?
Yeah, I would say the same for secondary school or even for primary school, that there are disadvantages for students with less German proficiency. Or if we again look at those students we are talking here, those who want to enroll, They have to go to the upper secondary school, where German in most federal states is even part of the final exam, though they have to have an exam in German, and this prepares them well for university. So it's more in primary school and secondary school in this sorting process where we do have these challenges of students with less German proficiency to let them catch up to acquire the university entrance certificate. So, well, yes, there is a problem that is in primary and secondary school, but due to the sorting, those who do enroll must have the German exam passed to be eligible.
And I imagine, of course, reflecting on the background, the family, the parents, if their command of the language, in English or German, is not strong enough, of course, it presents additional challenge in understanding the educational system, anything that goes to matriculation and further study. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. The next one is really looking at what was addressed before as far as the educational disparities at the primary and secondary levels are concerned. The first question I would have for that, or I haven't, but someone in the group, is what are the examples of interventions at these levels that you have seen have a positive impact? And I think coupled with that is why I want to combine the question. You've been asked about role models, and I think that would probably be one example of intervention. Is there data suggesting diversity, whether it be teachers, faculty, and particularly in your cases as female professors, whether or not that has sort of been a positive intervention with some of the students you have taught?
Yeah, Marita, do you want to talk about some of your research in that regard, and then I'll take over?
Yeah. I may point out that I do have a project on counseling the students who are eligible to enroll and to mitigate this inequality we have been talking about. And what we see in our project is that it is specifically individual counseling that helps students from less privileged backgrounds to go into university, to decide to enroll. And other studies have shown that short information sessions, that is short information on the cost, on the benefits, doesn't make much of a difference. It's the individual career planning that is helpful to mediate social inequalities. And we have done this on the one hand for students with low social family background, and here we see that this individual counseling led, in particular, the ones I pointed out, those high-performing students, they do have the potential to enroll, but they do not enroll. And here the counseling had been particularly successful to motivate and to encourage these students to go for university. And we see also some effects for gender differences. And here we have seen in our study that it is the field of study where individual counseling indeed made a difference. And interestingly, it was particularly the male students who could be encouraged and motivated to study the female-dominated fields. So they had some support to go out, to look outside the box and enter a field they wouldn't have taken into account if they wouldn't have had the support of this individual counseling. So putting it in a nutshell, it's individual counseling and career planning that helps to mitigate inequalities.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I'm going to shamelessly put in a plug for my book written with Tom Dupreet called The Rise of Women, because in there we really extensively try to figure out what's going on with particularly young boys and men in the United States, in that the returns to a college degree are high in the United States for both men and women. And so why are we seeing this really declining rate of men going to college? Part of it has to do with the gender segregation in fields of study that we've talked about, and interestingly, there may be this interesting feedback loop where as more and more women are going to college, young men are saying, hey, that's not a space for me. I don't want to do this. That's a women's thing, which is because women's female dominated realms are often disparaged as being less status oriented. So there's a really interesting dynamic in the book. We talk about also the importance of family We find that boys that are coming from either female-headed households where there's no father present, or households where the father has very low levels of education, boys are the least likely to be going into college, which is not true from the daughters or their siblings. There's the women in those families. So there's family factors, there's school factors, as Marita discussed, there's societal factors and cultural factors that are influencing people's, ideas about, well, can I do just as well? If I don't go to college, I can get a job being an Amazon truck driver, or, there's other more pressing immediate concerns in their lives where they can't even imagine taking the costs, the opportunity costs of spending time in college or university. So there's so many really complex factors to this question, but yes, I think there's really many important for when we think about policy. One of the challenges in the United States is what I mentioned at the outset, which is there's not a unified federal system of education. And if anything, in this historical moment where the one department of education is in the United States, which has played some role of kind of coordinating, is possibly being disbanded. Things are very, very much determined at the state level, or even at the county level, or the district level, and so that makes interventions more challenging in the U.S. than perhaps in Germany, because there's not a unified kind of approach to dealing to mitigating these kinds of inequalities.
It's an interesting segue to a question that's come up in different forms. But if when looking at sort of the academic performance of females at universities, which tend to be a bit stronger than their male counterparts, but yet when they enter the workforce, in terms of what they earn, the representation on leadership level, et cetera, seems to be different, or not at the same level. I mean, that's just a reality. I mean, if you look at what one group earns versus the other, euro for euro or dollar for dollar, and I think it speaks for itself. So I guess that was one of the questions in terms of maybe to comment on that difference, and also basically, are women being held back in their careers? Is there socialization? What's going on before they get to the halls of academia, and once they leave it, that might be sort of nurturing this disparity?
So you have been asking about the labor market outcomes. So we do have all these women in college. They earn a bachelor's, master's, doctoral degree. Why don't we see much change in the labor market? I think one reason is, and that's what research shows, is part of the gender pay gap is due to different occupations. And that's also what we have shown here, that still the fields that men and women enter once they are enrolled differ a lot. And it's particular the boys' fields, engineering, computer science, also partly economics and management. Those are the most prestigious and most rewarding fields. So part of the story is due to this different field of study and occupation. Another part of the story is I would say in sociology and potentially in many other social sciences fields, is the female motherhood penalty. So a lot of women interrupt their career in the course of when they have a first birth, and this has very long-lasting consequences for their later career and their later incomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think those are two really important sources. For example, when we look at the gender wage gap, people who are just out of college very early in their mid-20s, the gender gaps tend to be quite small. They are certainly due to different fields that are remunerated differently, but then that gender gap grows over time. And that has to do with the fact that as women reach more middle adulthood and they're trying to manage the demands, especially in the US, well, we could debate about whether the German system of family support is better or not than the U.S. But in the U.S., we really don't have a system, a national system of help that helps families navigate that work-life balance. But so that's absolutely a factor. I would say also that inequality is, if I hope people are getting the impression from this talk, inequality is a really slippery thing, right? There's lots of loopholes that you can, and maybe this sounds I don't mean to leave a very pessimistic view here, but it's fascinating to see how it can pop, you'd think women going into higher education. When I started this research over 15 years ago, I was like, oh my goodness, certainly women's entrance into higher education is going to help mitigate all these other gender inequalities in the labor market and so on. I realize now in hindsight that I was perhaps overly optimistic. I do think many women are better off in many ways than, women have made enormous progress, and we have seen gender gaps in some realms decline. But interestingly, also, history has a way of there are pendulum swings, right? So we are in a historical moment where there's a bit of a backlash in the United States for the progress that women have made. So nothing. It's a moving target. Nothing is ever. We're talking about snapshots in time, and we have to think about how things change over time, but we also have to continue to have hope that things will continue to improve. So sorry for that tangent.
No, but I think it's also, an interesting, again, segue. I think probably time-wise, depending on how long the answers are, might be the last question. Might be able to get one more in. But, speaking of backlash, is the populist movement against education on some level. And that's a generalization. But one of the comments is quoting a Harvard philosopher, Michael Sandel, who has argued in The Tyranny of Merit that the broad cultural emphasis given to a college education in the U.S. plays a role in creating the resentments fueling the populist backlash against so-called elites. But he also noted, interesting, that about half of the students enrolled in the Ivy League institutions come from the top 1% of wealth in the U.S. I wasn't aware of that statistic. But those coming from less privileged backgrounds are not represented in the Ivy League to that extent. So I guess if you could both comment on that, if you have, comment on that firstly, and then secondly, Marita, do you see a similar sort of rise of resentment, whatever word you want to use, this is the word in the question that was posted, towards the tertiary education, or what is now being defined as elitism or the elite? And I think this is a timely question that we can't ignore, because I think it's really tangential to what we've been discussing.
What I like to point out first is perhaps some of you still have these numbers, so this little figures in mind. We have 100 students of group 1 and 100 students of group 2, and only 78 of one group 78 enrolled and only 25 enrolled. That does not mean, at least in the German case, and that's contrast to what you've been saying here, is that in the classroom, in the courses, in universities, that we do have only the students from a high social background. It's in fact half of the students that are sitting in the classroom have a non-academic background. And this is due that the group of those with no academic background is much larger. And if we end up with 25%, this is the same amount of students in total numbers compared to those where 78% enter in university. So in the university classroom, we have half and half composition of the student body. And I think that's something I always stress in my lectures, that students don't think if they come from less privileged background, I'm the only one. No, you're not the only one. Half of your fellow students come from less privileged background. But that's a difference to what you have said for the Ivy League institutions. And there again, we see this more equal system in Germany compared to the highly differentiated and stratified higher education in the US. So that was answer number one. Answer number two is resentment against higher education I think it's much less strong than it is in the US at the moment in Germany, but that's just my personal impression as a lay person here, as a reader of the newspaper. But I hand over to Claudia.
Well, I will just emphasize the statistic you mentioned, Peter, is very interesting. But
this is a quote from one of the questions. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I do think that in the United States, the media and the attention in general, and when we talk about the higher education system, tends to be really disproportionately focused on this very, very small part of the system, which is the elite universities. So I'm also aware that higher education is still an important source of social mobility for people from less privileged backgrounds. And in fact, scholarship shows that students who are the very students who are the least likely to go to college and university, get based on their family background, are actually the ones who reap the most benefit from a college degree. So it is still an equalizing force. It's just also very fraught with many challenges and problems.
Thank you. And I think that's looking at the clock. We're a minute over. That's a perfect way to end. We have a lot of interesting questions, unfortunately, in the chat that we were not able to address. One of which I'll put as a ... for our next conversation is, so what are the mechanism? What other areas need to be investigated to understand the structures that you've illustrated? So we'll keep that one in mind. But thank you both really for a fantastic conversation. Thank you to all of our attendees. And mostly, thank you, Eva and Moritz, for organizing this with our other partners and the German Center for Research and Innovation here in New York, Julia and Saskia. And thank you to everyone. Eva, I don't know, I'll pass the mic to you for the final word. But thanks to everyone for joining us. And please feel free to go to the YouTube channel and by all means, reach out to any of us if you have any additional questions or comments. Eva, thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Peter. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to all our partners. Thank you all for sticking around with us for this hour. It looks like the topic was of interest. We hope you can join us again for the next Transatlantic Tandem talk. And we wish you all a nice day. Thank you and goodbye.